there guys, gals, and non-binary pals, GM Potter here. Welcome to my channel where I discuss books and bookish things. And as it is the colder month of December, I thought it would be fun to discuss a book that maybe is not so much a Christmas book, but I know the movie that came out in the 90s with Winona Ryder and Claire Danes is usually thought of as a Christmas movie. In fact, the book opens on Christmas Eve, and that is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Let's get into it. This book I actually read while I was, the first time while I was still in like later elementary school, maybe middle school, because my grandmother loved it, I think my aunt loved it, and I wanted to read what they read. I wanted to read a grown-up book. And I could not get into it, like, at all. I hated this book. For years, I thought I hated this book. I read it again, and just to see, because opinions change, tastes change, and I really enjoyed this book. Much more than I did the first time, obviously, but just in general, I found it very enjoyable. I got this one through my local library, through the Libby app, and it's the version. There's several versions on the Libby app for audiobooks of this one. They range between 17 and 19 hours. I went with the 19-hour one just because I didn't want to miss a thing. So, about 19 hours, but on 2.5 speed, so it wasn't that bad. This book was originally titled Little Women, or Meg, Jo, Beth, and Amy, and it was originally published in 2 volumes, the first coming out in 1868, the second in 1869. Most people think of Louisa May Alcott as having written Little Women, Little Men, Jo's Boys, like all those books, the March family saga, as they're kind of known. But she was actually already an author. She started writing for the Atlantic Monthly, the magazine newspaper Atlantic Monthly, poems and letters and things, and she actually wrote under the pseudonym A.M. Barnard books that she described as lurid. I've heard other people describe them as potboilers or thrillers. They were really quite daring for the time period. And Little Women, it was her publisher, Thomas Niles, had encouraged her to write a book that would appeal to a widespread audience that was about girls. That he wanted to capitalize on the novel trend of the middle to late 1800s that was going around. Like, novels were like at their peak. Like, you could be locked in an asylum for reading novels at this point in time, and he wanted to capitalize on that. And he wanted something with widespread appeal that would sell a lot of copies really quickly and make them a lot of money. In fact, Louisa May Alcott is quoted as saying that she wrote it in record time for the money. The title itself is a Dickensian reference to the period between childhood and adulthood, kind of what we now think of as adolescence or young adulthood. That period where, to quote the great Britney Spears, I'm not a girl, I'm not yet a woman. Like that in-between period there. So we have our 4 principal characters. Margaret Meg March is the oldest. She is motherly and household-minded, but she's also vain and snobbish. She was my least favorite. We wouldn't be friends. And then there's Josephine Jo March, who has a fiery temper. She's very much a not like other girls kind of girl. Like, I thought she was kind of a pick-me. That she does everything to show, like she's constantly showing how different she is from her sisters. Like she's trying so hard to distance herself from other women, from other girls, from other females. And, well, I like boyish things. I like this. I like that. I like this other thing. I don't like girly things. To the point where it felt like she's trying to show you how special she is. And that could be the lost in the middle child thing. But for me, I thought it was just kind of annoying. She was my least favorite, which is interesting because I could tell that she's the author's favorite and probably the author based on herself the most. And then we have Elizabeth Beth March, who's kind, sweet, gentle. She's a bit of a wallflower. She's musically inclined. She doesn't really have a lot of development. If you know why. I will not spoil that, but there's not a lot of development. If you've read the book or maybe seen the movies, I have not seen the movies because when my Girl Scout troop wanted to watch the one from the 90s, I had already read the book and decided I hated it. I may have been going through a Joe March streak and not knowing it. And I refused to watch it. I instead called my mom to come pick me up. And I haven't seen the one with Saoirse Ronan because I watched Michaela Tour's review of the costumes, and where are the bonnets? Like, it's a great video. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's fantastic. She has a great sense of humor about it. But again, the costumes are just bad. They're just bad. And then we have Amy Curtis March, which, can I just say, I love masculine names as middle names for girls. I just love that. Maybe Curtis wasn't always a masculine name. I think it used to be a last name. I think it's a family name in this case. She has the most growth of any of the characters. She was my favorite. And she goes from a selfish, self-involved, coddled baby to this self-possessed, self-sure, confident woman. That there's this character that I didn't like. I thought I felt like Laurie didn't deserve Amy. He hadn't earned her. Like, he should have done more work on himself and made himself worthy of her. Like, yeah, he could have ended up with Jo or Meg or not Beth. I mean, he could have ended up with one of the other sisters and that would have been fine. But he ended up with Amy, and I liked Amy. I liked Amy a lot, probably because she went through the most growth of any of them. And I felt that Laurie didn't deserve her. For most of the characters, with the exception of Jo and Amy in her younger years, this book really made me think on the quote from Laurel Thatcher Ulrich, who's a historian, that said, "Well-behaved women seldom make history." And that quote is taken out of context and used incorrectly so much it makes me very upset, because it's such a beautiful quote that it's not an excuse to behave badly. It's not an excuse to be rowdy. It was actually in its original context meant to say that women who didn't push back and women who couldn't push back and women who towed the party line aren't remembered by history. They were there. They still did things. They still had thoughts and ideas and opinions and things that they mattered. Because they were people, they actually mattered. But because they weren't groundbreakers, because they weren't renegades, history forgot them. History was never going to remember them. And that quote especially sticks to me for Beth and for Meg. That Beth, because I feel like she's the one that's forgotten for a lot of reasons. And Meg, had she been a real person, not a character, no one would have noticed. Like, she would have been a blip on the radar and then nothing. So, the writing itself, the author uses a sweetness and a wrapping up of episodes of Little House on the Prairie kind of Pollyanna feel to cover up the hardness and the hardship that the family's going through. That their father lost all of his money in a bad financial decision, giving it to a friend. Or I think he was loaning it to a friend and the friend couldn't pay him back. And they lose everything and they're in genteel poverty, meaning they're very poor. They don't have any money, but they have a servant. So they're better off than nothing. They have a servant. But there's the scene very early in the book where they give their breakfast to someone who's less fortunate than they are. And it's only through the kindness of a neighbor that they're able to eat it all that day. Because they packed up their food and gave it away. That they're like, look, we don't have a lot, but what we do have, we should use to better someone else's experience. Which I think is a wonderful thing. This book has strong Christian overtones, that they're given little Bibles and there's a lot of Christian imagery in the book, but it's not heavy-handed, which is nice, because I don't really want a parable. The writing isn't overly flowery, but it's not really austere like you see in so many books of that time period, where you get the books that are just flowery and it's 30 pages to describe a single book on a bookcase, but there's 200 books on the bookcase, and so we've got to describe all 200 of them, and it's going to take 30 pages to describe each one. Like, no. But it's not austere writing where it's very to the fact, matter of fact writing, which you also got in this time period. It's very Dickensian to me. Her writing style in this reminded me of Dickens, and I read somewhere that she was actually inspired by Charles Dickens. Obviously, she took the title from one of his phrases. And yeah, this is one, I don't know as that I would read it again or that I would even buy myself a copy of it necessarily, but I did find it enjoyable. I might go watch the movies now. But yeah, have you read Little Women? What did you think of it? Did you dislike Jo? I know she's supposed to be everyone's favorite. She's written in such a way that she's kind of supposed to be your favorite. I could not stand her. I couldn't stand her. I did not like her. She reminded me of my worst not like other girls phase that I went through in middle school. So, are there any books that you read once and then went back to and completely changed your mind on? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!